Hello, this is Andres Useche, and we're continuing our chats with extraordinary filmmakers. This time, I'm very proud to have Angel Gamboa Bryant, an editor, nominated 3 times for the Emmys. Welcome to For Q TV. How's it going?
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me, Andres. It's going well.
It's a pleasure. Great, great. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Uh, we would like to begin by learning a little bit about yourself growing up, the first times maybe you thought about a creative life for you, and how did that shape you?
Well, I don't have your typical story of knowing that I wanted to go into the arts as a profession. I
Hmm.
grew up in Detroit in the 80s and 90s. My father was an immigrant, so he really didn't know much about, professions in the US and school and all of that, the educational system. So I sort of grew up thinking you went into the typical either, science or educate, you're a teacher, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer. But I had a heavy background in art. I was always an artist, painting, drawing, photography, dancing. And then it wasn't until I got to university, I was going to major in science, and I saw the pamphlet with a list of majors, and on there was broadcasting cinematic arts. And I said, wow, what can you do with this? Can I actually work in television or film? So they had like a seminar with professionals from the industry that you could sort of, with a Q&A and kind of get an idea of what you could do. And I found out you could actually work in television or film. So I dove in head over heels and just like fell in love with it. I was like immediately fell in love with it, was very passionate about it. And then I never looked back.
Hmm. Now, editing to me, as a filmmaker, director, and also editor sometimes, to me, editing, obviously, as you know, can make or break any film and any TV show, but it's not necessarily the first thing that people think about when they think about a career in film. And part of what we're trying to do is expose our viewers and our diverse um, audience to different ways to approach the arts, and hopefully see more diverse representation in the future. So I wanted to learn a little bit about what made you choose or end up doing editing specifically.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're 100% right on that. And even I didn't understand that editing was then like that's the next step to it. So I then learned that filmmaking and television making, the arts were a very wonderful and viable career. So once I started studying, I still didn't really understand that an editor was a position, a
Mhm.
profession, and an art. And so once I started in school, you do all of it, right? You write, you direct, you sometimes get on camera, you learn every aspect of filmmaking. And I was always drawn to the edit bay. It was just where I realized the finality of the story was. It's where the story was actually created because you have all of these tools, right? You can have all this beautiful footage that was shot. It was acted wonderfully, directed wonderfully, all the aspects that you need. And then you have music and other things to put together a story. It doesn't ever really come together until you're in the edit bay. That's when all the magic happens. That's when you take all of your tools that you've been given and you build the house or you build your world. So yeah, and when I was in college, that's what happened. I just found myself always in the edit bay. I kind of
Mhm.
worked backwards. I would shoot my footage and then go and figure out what the story was in the edit bay, similarly to what the everybody in the unscripted world does now, right? In
Mhm.
documentary filmmaking or anything that's unscripted, you go out and kind of shoot it, find the story, or even news, and then put it together in the edit bay. So that's when I found out that it was an actual a career path.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you're right;
And
it's an unseen part of the industry. Like nobody knows. If you notice the editing, I've made a mistake, right? Like you shouldn't notice how the
Mhm.
story was put together once you watch it.
Right. And yeah, you could take the exact same footage with different editors and come up with completely different universes and takes on the material. But how did you find yourself in a position where you said, okay, this is viable for me to do as a career as an editor? Or what were the first inroads that you made into the industry?
So yeah, that's a great question as well. When I got out to LA, I knew I wanted to work in the industry. And I got a production assistant job on a DVD series. And on my first day, I showed up and it was in art department. I was working on set. A bunch of the producers were there and they were looking at a locked off shot of a screen on a stage, and they wanted to know how they were going to composite some footage into the monitor behind the actor. And I guess like whoever was supposed to make the decision that day wasn't there at that time, so they were kind of looking at each other trying to figure it out, and they were like, does anybody know how we need to shoot this so that we can composite this into the green screen after? And I was like, I think you I just spoke up. I was like, I think you need to square off the shot, lock it off, and make sure the actor is clear of the screen. And they all turned around and looked at me like, who are you? And I was like, I'm the intern in art department. And so after that, the producer came to me and said, do you have interest in working in post? And of course I was like, yeah, of course I do. I would love to. So once we wrapped the filming of it, he invited me to work as an assistant editor on the series. So I did that. And then shortly after that, they just started giving me things to cut. And I was cutting promos, like all kinds of different promos for several years until I went into working in television.
And in that period of time, were there things that surprised you when you actually saw how the magic was done and how the process was?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize how much the editor actually did, right? So I get all of the footage and I put it together in the story. I guess I thought that the editor only would cut the footage together. I didn't realize that we also we put in temp music. We set a template for the composers. We create temporary VFX. We'll set a look, by changing the color of something. We set a tone. We basically create the entire roadmap for then what happens after that, for all of the finishing, for all of the VFX, for all of the graphics, all of the composing. And I guess I didn't realize that it was that big of a role. It wasn't just cutting together a story with images and words. It's much bigger than that. I think that would be my biggest surprise.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Were you looking up to specific editors at that point? People that you wanted to learn from, or?
Yeah, I did. I mean, Walter Murch, Thelma Schumacher, I definitely read a lot and watched a lot of their work. And just anything that I was a big Quentin Tarantino fan at the time. I watched a lot of features. And so, yeah, those were some of the people I looked up to.
And was there a point where you thought, I can find my way into comedy specifically? How did that happen?
No, so that's a great question. It's another thing where I didn't really necessarily say I wanted to be a comedy editor. In fact, I love all genres. I watch all genres. I would love to cut all, I'm not limited to just comedy. However, it just happened to be an area that I was always drawn to and really good at. And I became known very early in my career as a comedy editor, even when I worked in unscripted. And that's actually what kind of led me to work in doing stand-up comedy, because I worked for a company called Push It Productions with Paige Hurwitz and Wanda Sykes, who are two very talented comedians and storytellers. And they just kept hiring me because of my comedy reputation and experience. And then they had all of these stand-up specials, which was like the most incredible experience. And it basically led me into the rest of my comedy career.
Now, most people may have heard the saying that comedy is all about timing. But when it comes to filmmaking, I mean, there's nothing more critical than landing that joke and the space between, and the pauses and the movement and getting everything right. And it's shot in a way that's so much coverage and so much material. So could you tell us a little bit of how you learned to approach this huge beast of editing that is comedic editing?
Yeah, with comedy, you're absolutely right. So comedy is about timing, but all of editing is about timing. You're definitely right. If it comes to drama, it's going to be more about that pragmatic pause, right? For example, or maybe it's just about the way you can have a lot of silence with imagery that is woven together in a way that it paints a picture and tells a story without sound. Comedy, however, is usually, and not always, but usually is pretty fast paced. And you kind of want everything, all of your spaces to be filled in with moments that have a purpose. You don't really have long spaces with pauses. So even like, for example, sometimes when we have a scene where we have to get a character from one space to the next, and there is a lot of like open air in there, your instinct is to get rid of it. You need to fill the space, or you need to get out of the scene faster, because with comedy, there really is no, you shouldn't really, unless there are comedies that do that, right? But mostly they're fast paced. So like, for example, we had a scene in History of the World Part 2 where it's a scene called, it's an SSR meeting with this family called the Mudmans in Russia, in the Russian Revolution. And at the end of the scene, the main character, Schmuck Mudman, he goes into the kitchen to cook some food. And there's this moment where he needs to leave the room and we need to get on to the next line of the scene. And we were all kind of sitting there like, this can't drag this long. Like even like a couple seconds is too long. So we were sitting in the edit bay with Nick Kroll, who plays Schmuck Mudman, looking at each other like, how are we going to fill this space and add a laugh or add a moment that needs something? And he started singing one egg omelet, maybe some rye toast, as his character was exiting. And we were like, you just need to record that and we'll add it to the scene as ADR, right? So that and then it adds an extra laugh and we don't have that like dead space. So,
that's awesome. Well, speaking of History of the World Part 2, how did it feel to come into something that's been anticipated for so long with one of the geniuses of comedy like Mel Brooks, and what did you learn in doing it?
Well, first of all, it was a very surreal moment to get the call. I got the call from Wanda Sykes because I have a long history working with her. As I mentioned, I was working with her on the Upshaws, and we had just finished, and she called me and said, what do you think about working on History of the World Part 2? And for a moment, I was like, she can't possibly be talking about like the sequel to History of the World Part 1, because it's, like I did grow up watching Mel Brooks, right? I've seen History of the World Part 1 and Spaceballs and all those movies. And for some reason, I just was in disbelief. I couldn't, and I was like, do you mean Mel Brooks? Because it wasn't really he hadn't really read about it yet. It wasn't really announced. So I didn't know. So then she said, yeah, it's Mel Brooks. And I seriously was like, are you joking? You can't be serious. She's like, no, I'm serious. And I was like, yeah, like definitely I want to work on that. So it took me a while to kind of get over the shock of that. And I was very nervous showing up on the first day, because I'm in this room with these extremely talented people and just like comedy legends, Nick Kroll, Wanda Sykes, Ike Barinholtz, and even the writers and directors. It was just very surreal. But once I got past that, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Everybody was very embracing. The team was very collaborative. They gave us a lot of creative freedom, probably the most I've ever had in my career. So it made the project not only very fun, but I think that because we all had a voice, we were all allowed to give our input, and we all would watch scenes together. It really elevated the show in the end. And I think the show turned out better than it could have.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of collaboration we had.
And you had the advantage also of being able to approach all these different periods, like period mini films in all these sketches. How did you approach the challenge or the opportunity of trying to find that balance between the rhythm of the performers, the pace of comedy in general and this specific project, and sometimes maybe the possibility to play with the format of the stuff that you're referencing, like either the period of time or the movies that have been made about those periods of time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It was challenging for sure. It was a challenge in, I think, all the best ways. The four of us who edited on the show, Steph Philo, George Mandel, Dan Flesher, and myself, we all come from a wide range of backgrounds in editing. A few of us have cut it unscripted, and I've also done a multicam sitcom, which one of the big storylines in there was a multicam sitcom.
Really?
And I think that, and some others came from a lot of sketch comedy and improv. I think that we all were able to draw upon our experiences and bring like a certain like skill set to the table, and we took that and we implemented it in the scenes that we worked on. And then we would also, if I hadn't worked on a sketch comedy scene, for example, or improv, I might cut my scene together and then show it to George, who has more experience in that area, and we'd look at it together and I'd say, am I honoring this in the correct way? Like, I think I did, but do you have an idea of maybe how I could make it better? So we were always bouncing ideas off each other like that. And every scene was very individual. We had to approach it in a very individual way, like no two things were the same, right? So like you're saying, there's parodies. There was the Kubla Khan portion of the show, which they had a Housewives parody with that was cut very differently, for example, than like the Shirley Chisholm multicam sitcom, and very differently from the Jesus portion of the show, which was like the Beatles parody, right? Which is like a documentary parody.
Hilarious, yeah.
They were all very specific. And I think what made it work the best was all of us, the ability that we had to sit in a room together and all look at it together, and everybody gave their input. I think that's what made it work.
That's awesome. I was wondering, well, it sounds like you had the ability to approach each sketch differently sometimes. But in general, if you could maybe summarize really quickly the differences in approaching, the history of the world part 2 as a whole versus the Upshaws, which we'll talk about next, and also the Netflix specials. Like, just give us a really quick, if you can, introduction to the process, to your own process as you work on each of these.
So with History of the World Part 2, most of it is it's sketch comedy. So sketch comedy is cut in a way that it's a very fast pace, and also there's a lot of improv. So you have to kind of like find creative ways to weave in the improv jokes with the actual story. So that's like an animal in and of itself. So you kind of approach it in a way that you get the actual story that was shot to be there, right? Because you always want to honor the script. You want to honor the story the way it was written. And then you have to find artful ways to weave in these like gems of improv comedy that add extra layers of laughs, but still maintain the story. So that's kind of like the basic approach to History of the World Part 2. The Upshaws is a multicam sitcom, so it's very different. It's meant to sort of like breathe and be open much more than sketch comedy. It's more like cutting stand-up comedy. It has a live studio audience, and there's moments where you just sort of like let the joke land, let the audience laugh, and let the actor take it in. It's a very different approach. But even though you have 4 cameras at most times, you're still, at least for me, when I'm editing, I'm still approaching it like a single cam show, in the sense that I go through every single take and I'm looking for the best take no matter what. I don't care if there was a second camera on it. I'm going to look through every take for the best line. And then what was the other one? You asked about a different show?
Yeah, the Netflix specials and in general. But...
Oh, like cutting stand-up specials. Those are, yeah. So that's a very different art form than I think either of the two. But it lines up a little bit more similarly to a multicam sitcom. Those shows are stand-up comedy is just like, I love it. That art form is very. It's fun to watch. It's incredible to cut, because usually there's 2 performances that are cut, and I have to find a way to find the best jokes between the 2 performances and weave them together into one show seamlessly. And even though we have many cameras, it almost never matches up.
Right.
So you have to find like tricky ways to cut around it. And you're like, for us, usually the ones I'm making with Paige and Wanda at Push It Productions, we don't like to show audience as cheats, during if we can't match a cut. So we'll spend hours sometimes finding like the perfect shot and the perfect like line to make a joke land and match up. So it's pretty creative as well, but just in a different way.
I'm also wondering about the differences in the day-to-day process with, of your collaboration with the crews in each of these.
Okay, so that's a great question. They're also very different. With the Upshaws, I am most hands-on in that show than I am in any other show, because the editor in a multicam sitcom is part of production. Where usually we're not. Usually we're just post-production. So we shoot 2 days per episode on that show. And I go during the pre-shoot, which is the first day, I go to set and sit in Video Village with the directors, the writers, the producers, and watch everything that they shoot and make sure that they get all the coverage. And they will look back at me after they shoot a scene and say, okay, Angel, do we need to do a pickup or do we need to? And usually I'll say, yeah, you need to go back and get line 32 because the camera was moving or whatever happened. So that's a lot of fun because it's much more hands-on for me. And I feel a lot of responsibility in that sense, right? To make sure that if I'm in the edit bay and we didn't get the shot, I can only then look at myself because I was there. Like what, sometimes as an editor, you're going like, why didn't they get, and I can't, and then I can only say, why didn't I say something? But it's a lot of fun being involved with production. But it's very fast paced on that show too, because you have to cut about half of the script in one day. So that, and then in History of the World Part 2, I came on a little bit later, so I wasn't very involved with the production until we did some pickups later on, and then some reshoot. They shot a couple of new scenes, additional scenes. One of them being a deep fake for the cold open. So I went to set for that because that was a whole new process for me. I'm not sure if you know what a deep fake is. Have you heard that before? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, this was the first time I had ever heard of one. We did a deep fake with Mel Brooks' face over this actor Brock O'Hearn's body. And in order to do that, it takes a lot of magic. And I basically had to edit together Mel Brooks' voice first. And then I went to set while they played back his voice, and Brock O'Hearn had to lip sync over his voice to make sure, I was there to sort of make sure they did it exactly right so that I could then bring it back and cut it together and then send it off to the deepfake company. So that was a lot of fun, but I would say, like, generally speaking, on the shows I work on, I don't have a lot of work with the production team until we get into post. Mm-hmm. Then it's full hands-on, of course.
We mentioned how sometimes you're editing, you're like, why didn't they get this? What do they, what were they thinking? They know we're gonna need this piece or something. Yeah. And of course we have some productions, large productions, they actually have an extra space for extra photography at the end. But in general, what would you say to different members of the crew to make your life easier? What are there things that you've always thinking like, oh, I wish they would have done this and that in general that I could apply, overall?
Yeah, it's funny. I think this question applies more to anything that I work on in multi-camera than single cam, because I think single cam in general is it's shot very differently. It's a lot trickier, and I think they go back and do a lot of inserts and pickups and things. But with multi-camera, I tend to get more like, why didn't they shoot it? Because they'll have, several cameras on set. And sometimes I think, especially when people come from like a live TV background and they're shooting multicam, they're assuming that maybe like one of the 5 cameras is getting the shot. So then sometimes like the 3 of the other cameras will reposition in the middle of a line. And I'm like, it's very frustrating because you're thinking, well, that actor on that camera, the B camera that decided to reposition, who was giving that line, I lost that. I can never go back and get that coverage again. And they might go back and do the line again, right, on another take, but the take is just never as good. Uh-huh. So that's one of the things I'm like, well, I can't stay where they are. But I get it. It doesn't work that way. That's not, they have to reposition for whatever reason.
Do you get that chance as much as you'd like to be able to check on that?
Yeah, I do, but it's also very complicated, and that's what gave me a lot of respect for multi-camera directors being there, realizing how hard it is to catch everything, because you're watching so much at once. You're trying to pay attention to the script, you're looking at all 4 cameras, making sure this camera wasn't shaky, the actors said the lines right, and sometimes, it just, you can't see everything. So I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for that job. The directors on those multicam shows it's tough. It's really tough.
And I have a lot of respect for multicam editors. My God, I mean,
thank you.
I sometimes get overwhelmed just, as a director, and I'm coming from a single camera, and I'm the writer. So I have a clear vision of everything. And I try to, and then I have the footage. And to me, it's the most exciting time because I can make the movie. At the same time, I feel like the possibilities are endless. Even though I knew what I wanted exactly, there's so many ways to approach it. So when you have all this footage, like how do you keep zen, and how do you how do you find your focus and not get overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of possibilities presented to you?
You have to you just can't think about it like that. Like for me, because it really is, you're right. Like there are endless possibilities. I tend to take it just like one scene at a time, one piece at a time. And when I approach a scene, it's like I'll dive into it and explore every angle of it that I can. And
Mhm.
usually it kind of, it'll present itself pretty quickly, as like depending on performances or the way that it's shot, you'll kind of figure it out pretty quickly as what the tone needs to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but yeah, you have to just kind of like, each scene is its own little challenge, and then then it's like build it all together. And that's another challenge, right? Because sometimes you can move scenes around and change the effect of the story as well. You can change the order of the scenes or change
Of
the way,
course.
right? So it's a part one and a part two, and then the collaboration also really helps.
That's a good advice for life in general. Just to
Yeah,
take each thing at a
one
time.
step at a
At
time.
a time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. One of the things that we try to champion here, I'm a Latino, obviously, and but we also try to empower women specifically, and just try to find ways in which we can make the world a little bit more empathetic and diverse and inclusive. And so it's very inspiring for us to have you here, and hopefully inspiring to many other Latinas who are looking into editing or into filmmaking. Sometimes it's hard, but I would love to hear about what it means to you to be a Latina, how that knowledge informs what you do, and how it affects your sensibility when it comes to, say, the Upshaws or other where you need to have that cultural, sensitivity.
Yeah, I think that, every experience we have in life shapes us. And I think that, the more experiences you have and the more things you face and the adversity and challenges and all that, they help shape you as a person. And I would definitely say that, being first generation on my dad's side, Mexican American,
Mhm.
it's definitely influenced my career. It's especially when it comes to the Upshaws. We were a working class family in the Midwest, a minority family, who had the challenges that any minority working class family would have. And the Upshaws are, you know, very similar. They're a minority family in the Midwest facing all kinds of challenges. And, for me, it's very relatable.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it definitely helps when I'm trying to land a joke, to having like a deeper understanding, because you really do, when you're cutting comedy, you have to understand the jokes that are being told. You have to relate to it somewhat or find a way to find it funny yourself. Otherwise, it's hard to cut it. You really do have to find it funny. Um, and I guess just in general, having that background and having a second language is also really helpful in my work. There's many times where I'll have a scene that maybe was even in another Romance language, like French.
Mhm.
And I don't understand French, but I can understand enough of the cadence of the language that I can deal with the subtitles, which is important because it seems like a non-important thing, but I've very often seen subtitles in TV shows and movies, and I'm sure you have too, where you're like, that's not what they said, or they said that at a different place, or, so it helps with that kind of thing as well. It's just an added layer of uh,
Mhm.
knowledge that I have. So.
Great. And if you could take this platform, just some final words that you would say to any aspiring editors out there, any Latino who wants to be part of the industry, but are coming against maybe closed doors, or what would you tell them?
I would say to just don't stop, don't give up. I would say to get your name out there, meet as many people as you can who are like-minded and who have the same sort of desires and goals you do. Get together with them, make short films, make commercials, do whatever you can. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can shoot it on your iPhone, get the experience. And once you get the experience and you build a network, then it's all about entering film festivals, promoting yourself, talking about it, say it to everybody, say it out loud. I want to be an editor. I want to be a director, whatever it is, and pursue it. Pursue it. Use your networks. Shamelessly promote. Don't give up. If you try hard enough, you're passionate about something, people will hire you. And if you get a job and you're a production assistant and somebody asks you to get their coffee, ask them what they like in their coffee and get their coffee, because that person could be the next person who brings you on to Star Wars or something. So don't have an ego, don't stop working, don't stop trying, and you'll get it.
And come over prepared like you did that time.
Yeah.
That you can come up with ideas on the spot.
Speak up and say yes. Just say yes. Always.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great, and we're very proud to have you, and very happy, rooting for you, and congratulations again on your nominations. We hope to see you win some and get many more and continue your exemplary career.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Bye.